long before Jake, Emma, and their friend decided to spend a weekend at Lakeview Cabin. It was already the site of an unsolved mystery. That story, whispered among locals, was about a woman named Lila Everett. She had come to the cabin seeking refuge, hoping to escape a dark chapter in her life. But the isolation she craved was not as peaceful as she imagined. Lila had moved to the small town nearby after a messy breakup. It wasn't just any breakup, though. Her ex, Mason, was obsessive. He couldn't let her go. For months after their split, she'd receive strange calls, see flickers of movement outside her apartment late at night. No matter how hard she tried to shake the feeling, she always felt watched. When Mason was finally arrested for breaking into her apartment, Lila decided to leave the city for good. She found the cabin, a perfect retreat by the lake, surrounded by nothing but trees and water, a place to hide, to heal. When she arrived at the cabin, the first thing that struck her was the eerie quiet. The air felt thick, heavy, as if sound itself was reluctant to exist there. But Lila brushed it off. She was here to get away, after all. She set her bags down and looked around. The cabin was old, but it had a rustic charm. Creaky wooden floors, stone fireplace, large windows that overlooked the still dark waters of the lake. She thought she could make this work. For the first few days, Lila found solace in the isolation. She read books by the fire, hiked through the woods, and spent her evenings gazing at the stars reflected on the glassy surface of the lake. But it wasn't long before the unease she had tried to leave behind began creeping back in. It started with little things, a feeling of being watched, the sensation that someone or something was out there. At night, as she lay in bed, Lila could hear soft footsteps outside the cabin, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing just beyond the walls. She told herself it was just animals, the woods teeming with life. But the footsteps were too controlled, too human. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows over the lake, Lila noticed something strange. Across the water, near the edge of the woods, a figure stood watching her. At first, she thought it might be a hiker or someone from town, but the figure didn't move. It remained rooted to the spot, tall and dark, with no discernible features. The distance made it impossible to see a face, but the way it stood there, unmoving, sent a chill down her spine. Lila stared at it for what felt like hours, frozen with fear. She finally turned away, her heart racing, convincing herself it was nothing more than her imagination playing tricks on her. When she looked back, the figure was gone. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the cabin. Lila lay in bed, eyes wide open, gripping the sheets. The sounds moved slowly, as though whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted her to know they were there. She had locked all the doors and windows, but that didn't bring her any comfort. The next morning, she found footprints in the soft mud near the front porch. Large, unmistakably human footprints. They led from the woods, circled the cabin, and stopped directly in front of her bedroom window. Lila's blood ran cold. It wasn't just her imagination. Someone had been there, watching her. Panic gripped her as she called the local authorities, but they dismissed her concerns.
It's probably just a hiker or some teenagers messing around,
the sheriff told her.
This is a quiet town, nothing to worry about.
But Lila wasn't convinced. That night, she kept every light in the cabin on, determined to stay alert. She didn't sleep. Around midnight, the footsteps returned. This time they were closer, more deliberate, and then a knock at the door. Lila froze. The knock was slow, rhythmic, as if whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world. Her phone was useless. There was no signal this far from town. She was alone. The knocking continued. With shaking hands, Lila grabbed the fire poker from the hearth and crept towards the door. Her breath caught in her throat as she peered through the peephole. Nothing. There was no one there. She stepped back, heart pounding, when a voice, low and raspy, whispered from the other side of the door.
I know you're in there, Lila.
She dropped the poker in shock. Her name. The voice knew her name. Without thinking, she ran to the bedroom, locking herself inside. Her mind raced. How could they know her name? Was it Mason? Had he found her? She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Hours passed. The footsteps outside never stopped. They circled the cabin over and over, sometimes near the front door, sometimes near the windows. Lila didn't dare look. She couldn't. As dawn broke, the footsteps faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Lila cautiously emerged from the bedroom, her body trembling. The cabin was eerily quiet, the only sound her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She had to leave. She grabbed her keys and raced to the front door. But when she stepped outside, she froze in horror. There, in the soft earth, were fresh footprints. They surrounded the cabin, winding closer and closer until they stopped right at the door. And written in the dirt, scrawled in what looked like fingernail scratches, were the words, "I'm waiting." Lila never looked back as she fled Lakeview Cabin. She left everything behind, disappearing into the morning mist. The town never saw her again. And the cabin, it still stands by the lake, waiting for the next visitor.